All right, Tanya Summary Shiur, week 30, chapters 6 and 7 in part 1 of Shara Yichud V'Amunah. Very fascinating Tanya this week, even only in a kitur dika way, even only in a summarized way. Without any further ado, let's jump right into it. So, until now, in Shara Yichud V'Amunah, the drift that we've been going on, is that the same Hashem that made the entire world is the same Hashem that concealed himself within the world and conceal the fact that he is actually permeating everything and constantly creating everything, something from nothing. A really fascinating concept. Well, we said that Hashem does this by virtue of two names. He, if you will, he wears two hats. You have Shem Havaya, the four-letter tetragrammaton. I think that's how it's pronounced anyway. The four-letter name of Yud Kei Vav Kei is the name which he uses to express his creation, to express his kindness. And the name of Elikim, which is what we're going to be discussing at the beginning of chapter 6 over here, is the name that Hashem uses to restrict and to conceal himself. So the Alter Rebbe says this is the reason why the numerical value of the name of Elikim is the same as the numerical value for the Hebrew word Hateva, which means the nature. Because Hashem conceals the light with which he created the worlds, not a flashlight light. When we say a light, we mean a passing of vitality for the creation of the world to take place. So Hashem restricts this with the name of Elikim, that he also functions as the restrictor, the withholder, to make sure that we don't become too overwhelmed by the greatness of Hashem. And this name of Elikim is like a shield, it's a cover for the name of Havaya, the four-letter name, to conceal the light of Hashem so that we can actually exist in the world without being overwhelmed by Hashem. What says the Alter Rebbe, we can see and we can appreciate that really it's one and the same. It's not that there's two opposing forces that are fighting in different directions and that ultimately in the tug of war has created this world. No, it's that Hashem is Kaviyachol playing tug of war with himself. But really, the whole purpose is the creation of the world. And both the side of trying to create the world and both the side of concealing Hashem so that the world can actually come to be, both of them are working towards the same goal of creating the world, and it's all Hashem. There's no intermediary, there's no created negative force. There's simply just Hashem creating the world, and to this end he does it in two ways, one of giving and one of withholding, so that we can live in a balance where we feel our own existence because we're not overwhelmed by godliness, but at the same time we don't feel godliness and we were able to feel our own existence. It's two sides of the same coin, literally. I mean, Besim, it's figurative, but essentially the point is that they're two sides of the same entity. So the Alter Rebbe says, this is what it means when it says in the pasuk that we quoted in chapter 1, that you should know today and you should place it into your hearts, that Hashem is God. Literally, the Hebrew words are Havaya Hu Elikim. So the Alter Rebbe says, this is what the pasuk means, that you should know, you should place it into your heart that really it's one and the same Hashem, and Hashem is just functioning in different ways, but he's doing it all with the one intention of creating the world. And that you should know that there's not two separate entities, chas v'shalom, not even a created entity. There's no two separate entities, one of creating the world and one of withholding godliness from the world so that we can function, so that we're not overwhelmed. It's really one and the same. Havaya Hu Elikim, it's the same Hashem. The Alter Rebbe says this is why the pasuk goes on to say, which we made a question out of in the first chapter. We said, how could a person possibly think that really there's another God hiding out in outer space or another God hiding deep down in some tunnel somewhere? The Alter Rebbe says it's not to say a literal heavens above and a literal earth below. It's saying the metaphorical heavens. I mean, B'chlal, Orthodox Jews are wont of saying that Hashem in the heavens. I mean, there's a lot of bituyim like that. There's a lot of phrases that say, in heaven for fend, etc. When we say heaven, we don't mean the actual skies. We mean metaphorical heavens. So in the same way that in the heavens above, that is to say, from Hashem's point of view, Hashem is the one running the entire show. Hashem knows that he's one Hashem and that there's no other being, chas v'shalom, that's taking a partnership in the world. Hashem is doing everything himself, and he's just functioning in both sides. He's pulling a game of tug of war with himself to make that we can exist in the balance of that. So in the same way that Hashem appreciates that, we shouldn't say that just because from our point of view we look and we see that there's two aspects of Hashem, that there's the side of Hashem that wants to give and wants to create, and there's the side of Hashem that wants to withhold Hashem's presence from the world so that we're able to appreciate him, so that we don't become overwhelmed. So we shouldn't look and we shouldn't say that there's two sides, so we should think that there's two sides. Maybe that's what Hashem wants us to think. Chas v'shalom, says the Alter Rebbe. This is what the Pasuk is coming to tell us. That the same way that Hashem appreciates that there's only one Hashem, we should appreciate. But Aretz Mitachas, us down here on earth, we should appreciate that just because we can't appreciate that both roles that Hashem is playing are really to the same end goal, and we contextualize it as being playing two roles, we shouldn't become mistaken in that, and we should know and appreciate that there's only one Hashem, and then the pasuk finishes off, Ein oid, that there's nothing more besides for Hashem. That is to say, that there's not even something which is tuffle, there's not even something which is secondary, something which is a second fiddle, but less than that. There's nothing besides for Hashem. So that's what the pasuk means when it says, just to summarize, you should know today, place into your hearts, that the same Hashem that pushes to create is the same Hashem that holds back himself from being revealed in a full extent down here, because otherwise we'd be too overwhelmed. It's really Hashem trying to create us in the delicate balance of being able to feel our own existence and not being nullified, but still at the same time having some measure of existence. And Vashamayim Mimal, the same way that this remains true from Hashem's point of view, of Aretz Mitachas, we should appreciate it down here from our point of view, Ein oid, that there is literally nothing, there's no created entity that Hashem made to withhold himself from this world. It's really all Hashem, the same Hashem that's making the world and that fills it and permeates it constantly and is constantly creating something from nothing, is the same Hashem that makes that we're not overwhelmed by his being too revealed in the world. Just to note an important mashal the Alter Rebbe brings in explaining why this mashal doesn't apply to the relationship of Hashem in this world. So, we said before that Hashem fills the world, and it's not just Hashem, the Alter Rebbe saying it, this is a Lashon of Chazal, that just as a soul fills the body, Hashem fills the world. So, we might have thought to say that Hashem created an entity of world, and that Hashem fills it then. And that really he is expressing himself in everything in the world, and really he permeates everything, but that ultimately there's some other medium that Hashem created that is the vessel of his expression. The same way that the body is a vessel of expression of the soul. But, says the Alter Rebbe, this is not the case. And I'll explain to you why, says the Alter Rebbe. Because the body and the soul come from two different places. The body is a physical creation. The soul is a spiritual entity which is pushed down into the body. But the body has a place that it comes from. It comes from the father's seed and the mother's womb. And the body is developed and it's fleshed out. And these are points for that pun. But ultimately, there are two different things that come from two different places and they're pushed together. But the world is a complete creation, and Hashem is Taka revealing himself and concealing himself at the same time in order for the world to exist. But it's all from Hashem. It's literally all from Hashem. You trace back the roots and it all goes back to Hashem. So there's no difference, there's no distinction, there's no created being that Hashem pushes himself into. It's just everything is Hashem. From Hashem's point of view, he's able to appreciate that in a very concrete way, in almost a visual way, if you will. And for us, we appreciate it in a way of das. That is to say that we know it. So that concludes chapter 6. So chapter 7 starts off by jumping back to an introductory remark that was made at the beginning of Sha'ar Yichud V'Emunah, that the point of it is to understand the pasuk of Shema Yisrael and the phrase of Baruch Shem, that Shema Yisrael refers to Yichud Eilah, upper unity, and Baruch Shem refers to lower unity. Now, this is going to tie up, chapter 7 is going to tie up, Meretz Hashem, the general concept that we're discussing so far, which is, how does Hashem's unity relate to us? How are we supposed to be down here and supposed to appreciate that Hashem is really, truly one? So, to this end, to explain properly how Shema Yisrael is upper unity and how Baruch Shem is lower unity, and also we're going to have to get to what those mean, what those phrases of upper and lower unity mean themselves, the Alter Rebbe says, I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction, that we say that Hashem created the world so there could be a revelation of his kingship. So what does that mean, says the Alter Rebbe? It doesn't mean that Hashem wanted to be like, I don't know, Lahavdil, Elef Alufi Havdalis from Hashem, like some kind of king that wants to show off his riches, wants to build fancy palaces. That's not the vart. The vart is that a person can't be a king without having distinct and separate entities over which they are a king. If there's no one else, it's not being a king. A person could be a father to their children. Even then, it's difficult to say that a person could be a king over their children because there's a different relationship. There's a father and a child. The child is an extension of the father to a certain extent. In order for a person to be a king, they need to have completely unrelated subjects. Those subjects are subservient to them in a manner that a subject is subservient to a king. And yeah, then a person or an entity could be a king. So the Alter Rebbe says that this midah of Hashem, the midah of Malchus of Hashem, the midah of the practical, that there should be something separate from Hashem, is what keeps the world going, because the world needs to be an entity, an existence. If this expression of Hashem didn't exist, that He wants to be king over a people, then the world would cease to exist. The Alter Rebbe says that Hashem created space and time, two essential details for the existence of a world. And the Alter Rebbe says these things were created by virtue of this midah of Hashem's kingship. Everything that goes into having an existence comes from the fact that Hashem wants to have separate entities that He can be a king over. Now Hashem does actually put Himself into the world. We don't say that Hashem exists outside of the world and that it's only this feeling of His, etc., that is able to relate with the world. No, Hashem, the whole Hashem, is really enclosed in the world, which is really a very deep point to just be stating outright like that. That is the point, though. That is the truth. But it's an investment. It's not that this is a natural way of things being. Hashem is naturally, if you could say naturally about Hashem, obviously you can't say naturally about Hashem, but in a way of speaking, in a manner of speaking, Hashem is naturally existing outside of the bounds of time and space. Hashem isn't known to limit Himself in space, but Hashem is known to be, what's the word? He's omnipresent and He's omnipotent. And I do happen to think that there's no English word to describe the fact that Hashem exists above time, because I don't think that Goyim Lahavdil were able to conceive of that concept properly enough to make a word for it. But yeah, Hashem exists above time. And nevertheless, Hashem invests Himself in the world. But Hashem is really above all of these concepts. And all of these concepts are in a position that Hashem imposed upon Himself. So now, really, this concept is a crazy concept to conceive of. It's a crazy concept that really we can't properly use our minds to get around, because we can't really fathom the concept of imposing something like this that isn't something that is inherent. Let me try to explain. Because for us, let's say any time that we make a resolution that we're going to do something, let's say a person decides that they're going to go on a diet. So what that meant is that there's an idea that exists by the person, which the idea could have existed before in the person. So that's not something that's new. But the idea is then expressed by the person to an extent that they take that idea and they say, I'm going to take this idea and I'm going to make it have a real practical effect in my life. So the person then thinks, okay, so now I've changed. I used to be in one way where I didn't think that being on a diet was important. Not advocating for diets over here, just in the example. The person never thought that being on a diet is important. They might have known it. They might have known that being on a diet is important, but it never had any meaning to them. It was just an idea that existed theoretically to them. And then next thing they know, they're turning around and they're saying, okay, I'm now going to be a diet person. I'm going to have to tell everyone that really it's 8 hours and 16 hours and carbs versus protein or fat, whatever the diet may be. And not that telling everyone about the diet is an essential part of the diet, although it definitely feels like it sometimes. But the point is that now this is something that the person has changed. It may have been an idea, it may have been their own idea even, but now there's a difference in the person. Their mindset has changed. For Hashem created everything in the world, and He's imposing Himself. He's now permeating everything in the world, but He hasn't changed. He's still the same Hashem as before. There's absolutely no change in Hashem, which is something that we can't wrap our minds around. The idea of Hashem made the world. You would say, okay, so Hashem put Himself into the world, and now Hashem is, He's finally happy that He has a world, but you can't say finally happy about Hashem, because Hashem doesn't exist within the bounds of time. Now you might say, oh, well, Hashem invested Himself in time, so now Hashem is able to enjoy the concept of change. But no, Hashem doesn't, because Hashem still exists completely outside. It's not possible to say both of them at once. I mean, it is possible, because it happens with Hashem, but it's not possible for us to conceive the idea of the imposition of change that happens outside of the bounds of time, the imposition of change that happens without imposing any change. Hashem doesn't have any change that happens by Him, and at the same time He is invested in the world. This is something the human mind is not able to comprehend. And this is, says the Alter Rebbe, is what it says in the Navi. That Ki gavu shamayim me'aretz ki gavu drachim me'darchechem machshavosem machshavosechem, that just as the heavens are removed from the earth, so too are distant my ways from your ways and my thoughts from your thoughts. That Hashem created the entire world and everything in it, and He's invested in it, and at the same time it causes no change by Him. This is something that we cannot comprehend. The way that we are created is that any change that takes place in us is something that is actually a change, and it's not something that was part of our original existence that we're able to actually change in a meaningful way, and Hashem is not able to change in any kind of way. And at the same time, Hashem created the world, and He's invested in it, and we say that's not, and it's not a true existence vis-a-vis Hashem, but it still didn't cause any change. I can't explain it. I'd love to explain it, and I'm trying to explain it, but I can't, because it's not something that, it seems like it runs into a contradiction. The idea is something that I don't have any reason why it shouldn't be able to be that way inherently, necessarily, but there's nothing to relate it to. There's no concept. It seems forced to say that any kind of resolution is inherently change, but by Hashem it isn't that way. So yeah. That concludes chapter 7 of part 2 of Tanya. Or actually, it doesn't conclude chapter 7, but it concludes this week's portion of chapter 7. And Ris Hashem, next week, already started today, we're going to be finishing up chapter 7, finishing up this concept, and Ris Hashem moving on to understanding more about how these things work by Hashem. We've discussed this vis-a-vis ourselves so far, that we have a concept of a world, and we have a concept of how we relate to Hashem, and is Hashem giving us, or are we getting overwhelmed, how Hashem created us. Where do all these things take place by Hashem if Hashem is this one perfect unity, and there's nothing else, and there's no change, and there's no other being, there's no other creation, which is tafel. I need a good English translation for tafel. There's no secondary thing by Hashem, and at the same time we have all of this. So I'm Hashem looking forward to continuing.